evening and thanks for staying with us here on the Urban Debate at 9 p.m. We put the spotlight once more on the economy. And the big question that we are asking this festival season is, will things improve post-Diwali or are we headed for a prolonged slowdown? Now, we've put together multiple angles to understand the state of economy today. 4 big angles that we bring to you. Let's begin with what's happening globally. The new IMF chief, Kristalina Georgieva, has said that the world is suffering a synchronized slowdown. This is the world we're talking about, not just 1 or 2 countries. She says the IMF is expecting slower growth in 90% of the countries, including India, that the global trade growth has come to a near standstill. In a globalized economy, if more than half the world is struggling, it's bound to impact the rest. Now, India, as you know, viewers, is already experiencing a slowdown. For example, for the 8th straight month, Maruti Suzuki in our country has cut its production, this time by over 17%. But it's not just Maruti. Tata Motors has reported a 63% drop in production of passenger vehicles. And we've been repeatedly talking about the auto slowdown. Here is an interesting data point, and we will try and analyze this in the next half hour. A CMIE report on employment in rural India suggests that there is a bit of uptick in the last 1 month, led by substantial pickup in new jobs in rural areas due to improved monsoons. So what does that mean? From July to now, from September last year to now, are we genuinely seeing some kind of pickup in employment? We'll get those questions answered for you just a bit. Also, what is the government up to? Trying to boost the sentiment. So the government has termed this as a Diwali gift for over 1 crore central government employees as well as pensioners by increasing the dearness allowance that's been hiked by 5% to now 17%. A welcome move, of course, for all of these central government employees. But is this and the other announcements that have been made recently enough to boost the economy, enough to get the economy back on track? So 4 angles. Angle number 1, IMF chief's grim warning for the world. Angle number 2, the auto pain continues, intensifies for many companies. Or angle number 3, unemployment rate falls in rural India for the month of September. And angle number 4, dearness allowance hiked by 5%. Let's say good evening to our guests who are joining us right now. Dr. Brinda Jagirdar, Senior Economist, Santosh Mehrotra, Professor of Economics at Center for Informal Sector and Labour Studies at JNU, Siraj Hussain, former Agriculture Secretary, and it's good to have him today because we will be understanding the report that's come out as far as rural employment is concerned, and Aman Agarwal, Director for Indian Institute of Finance, who's joining us right now. But first up, let me just quickly go across to Mr. Mahesh Vyas, Managing Director and CEO of Center for Monitoring Indian Economy. Mr. Vyas, your report has got everybody very, very intrigued. Would you like to explain to us how you read the data that has come out?
Well, we do see an increase in employment in the month of September. It's an unusually sharp increase, and that has raised a lot of questions as to when there has been a steady decline in labor statistics, how do you explain a sudden increase of 7 million jobs in just 1 month? Particularly, there has been some juxtaposing that in 2018, we said that 11 million jobs were lost, and here exactly in 1 month, we say 7 million jobs are added. So that looks like it's too noisy. So the first disclaimer is that month-on-month variations has some statistical noise in it. So one should give some allowance for that. But nevertheless, 7 million increase is quite a substantial increase. Even if you discount that, we have still seen a very sharp increase in employment in the month of September. Now, of the 7 million jobs added in September, 6 million come from rural India. And the increase in urban India is just 1 million or a little less than that. So how do you explain the 7 million jobs addition in just 1 month? So it's easy to explain that. This seems to be the case of a big pickup in Kharif sowing in the month of September. If you go back to September 17 and September 18, we see that during the month of September, we see about around 3 million hectares of additional area coming under the Kharif crop, sowing I mean. Whereas in this year, in September 19, we saw 5.3 million hectares of additional area come under the Kharif sowing. This is a very sharp increase, and sowing is a labor-intensive activity, and that should be the major explanation for the increase in employment in rural India in September 19. Now, if this is true, then this is obviously not sustainable. Sowing season ends in September. There will be a sharp drop. There will be some remainder of employment which will remain because of the seasonal festive season. But one can expect a small fall from the 7 million shoot up that we saw in September.
Okay, that's very interesting, and thank you for putting it in that perspective. September, usually we are told, is also the month that sees this kind of uptick for the very same reason that you said. So if we keep that factor aside, Mr. Vyas, if we keep the Kharif sowing factor aside, are there other indicators that your research throws up that shows that perhaps a turnaround is around the corner? Because the big question we are asking is, if the world is witnessing a slowdown, is our pain going to get worse?
There is no evidence to show that jobs in other sectors are increasing. And I should add, to be honest, there is no evidence to the inverse of that as well, in the sense that there's no evidence that jobs are falling as well.
Yeah.
We only have one evidence that the area under the crops did increase, and that should explain the increase in rural jobs. But I don't see any reason why jobs should be increasing on a sustained basis, because a survey we completed also in September on investments saw that investments are actually not rising. New investment proposals are down to a 15-year low, and completion of projects has slowed down quite substantially. So if no investments are happening, I would assume that no new jobs can get created easily. So this was a one-month blip, which may possibly vanish.
Since we have you, very quickly, CMI data has triggered a debate on the jobs crisis now for a year almost. Often it's been dismissed by the government and those who back the government arguments. Do you believe that the fact that a year later we still don't have any substantive data from the government on unemployment is a concerning factor?
The government did put out the PLFS data, the NSSO's survey on employment and unemployment, and the numbers given by them, particularly for unemployment and labor participation, particularly unemployment rate in urban India, quarterly numbers more or less matched with the CMI survey. So if government agencies or government spokespersons swear by the NSS data, then I can just tell them that the CMI data says more or less the same thing. And they said that the unemployment in urban India in the last year, 17-18, was of the order of 9–9.5%. We said the same thing then.
Correct.
And we are saying now the unemployment rate in urban India is of the order of 10%.
While they did release that data, they actually still don't back it full-heartedly and actually offer us simultaneously data about the growth in number of Ola and Uber cars and drivers, and all of that argument is presented along with NSSO. So I'm not too sure if government still takes it very seriously. Mahesh Vyas, thank you for joining us and shedding more light onto those numbers that CMI has put out. And to my other panelists, thank you for patiently waiting by. We just had him for a short time, so I had to just go to him first. But let me actually go across to Mr. Siraj Hussain. Mr. Hussain, would you agree with what Mahesh Vyas is saying about the uptick we are seeing in rural employment, that it could be temporary and simply linked to the Kharif sowing season?
Actually, I agree with him because in June and July, the first 2 months of the monsoon season, there was a very high shortfall in the monsoon. as a result of which the progress of sowing was very slow. In fact, at that time, there was a very acute concern about the Kharif crop, but then we had very good rains in August and September, and in fact, September rains were some 130% of the long period average. So it is true that due to delay in rainfall, the sowing operations got shifted a little bit, but I had a detailed state-wise look at the CMI data, so I really do not know if it corresponds to the states where the sowing was higher in September as compared to July and August, and how does it compare to previous years? Because this figure of about 6 million jobs added in rural India is really very high, and one needs to look at the state level disaggregated data.
So what I can share with you right now that I have with me right now is in September 2018, the unemployment for rate was 6.5% and it's 7.16%. So relatively speaking, it's much, unemployment is still higher than what we saw last year in September. But if you look at August 2019, it was 8.19%. So that's the drop that we are witnessing from, from August to September this year. But let me bring in our other experts. Santosh Mehrotra, good evening to you. How are you reading the current economy indicators?
Well, the economic indicators are speaking for themselves. I don't think there's too much reading to be done. All the indicators suggest that growth is down, jobs are down, exports are not increasing, may not increase because as the IMF executive director was saying, the last year or so we've seen most of the global economies on a downturn. So, and as Mahesh Vyas was just telling us that there doesn't seem to be within this year much evidence of investment increasing. So in the context of most of the drivers of economic growth being tepid, I think those indicators are speaking for themselves.
So effectively what that means is, and if you look at what the IMF chief said, that in some of the largest emerging market economies such as India and Brazil, the slowdown is even more pronounced this year. They've obviously already cut the growth projections that they have. So how do we read this, Brinda Jagirdar? Does this mean that, this slowdown is not simply cyclical for 1 or 2 quarters? Or is it too soon to ask the question, are we staring at a recession?
There is no doubt that we are in a slowdown, and if the global economy, which means 90% of the world, of the countries, would be facing a slowdown, as the IMF chief has said. So obviously India cannot be immune to that. But one thing, we are a consumption-driven economy, not dependent on, not a trade-driven economy, and we are not a major commodity-producing economy, so that we don't need to depend on world demand. So that really gives us some kind of a cushion. But then if this slowdown, what it means is that it would affect inflows into the country. It would affect our exports also. So we really need to move around and see how we can protect ourselves, or rather prepare ourselves. Now this slowdown, why the chief says that it will be very pronounced in India is because we are looking at 8-9% growth, and now we have to settle for something close to 6% growth. So what I believe is that we will be looking at a slowdown for some more time, maybe definitely till the September quarter. The numbers are not going to be good. Even perhaps the GDP number could be disappointing, not below 5, but around that. But after that, in the second half and in the next year going forward, I feel the measures that have been taken, those are going to start kicking in. Now, we will not be immune to the trade dispute that is going on between US and China. China, for example, today says that it will buy more soya bean products from the US, 10 million tons more, maybe about $3 billion worth. So the disputes remain, but then I think they're trying to look at ways how to not let this escalate further. But the point is that exports have been slowing since last year already. And if we look at our situation, we need to be cautious. It's not a scary situation, but certainly we need to be cautious, because let's see how we can get the countries which want to leave, say maybe China, or which are looking for places to invest. How can we make India an attractive investment destination? That is something we need to do. And I think the measures that have been announced by the government, they're not short term and they're not going to kick in right now, but I think they will start showing results going forward.
Okay.
So we're in a better position than maybe other countries.
We are in a better position than maybe other countries, since Brinda Jakirtar. But Aman Agarwal, you know, what we saw from the last time that the world went through this kind of a synchronized slowdown was in 2008 and 2009, and everybody said that India was in a better position at that point of time, that we were able to somehow protect ourselves from larger global impact. Is the situation different this time, because we are already witnessing some of our own problems?
You see, Tanvi, few very interesting data which have come out in the last 2-3 days. One, which is that the United Nations does not have money to pay to its own employees. That's the only salary they have is for the month of October 2019. 70% of the economies have only paid, 30% have not paid their due funds, which are expected. Clearly shows that there is slowdown around the globe. The IMF MD managing director has already pointed that out, but she pointed out a very interesting fact as well, that there will be a dip in trade of about $700 billion, which would actually impact 0.8% of global GDP growth. The global GDP growth is around 3.6%. So we're looking at a growth figure of about 2.7 to 2.8% as against 3.6% last year, which we had. Now, this is not something very small, but she also pointed out the fact that we have already observed a substantial shift, especially in case of India and economies like Brazil. Please understand, as far as other macroeconomic factors are concerned and some of the steps taken by the government, we stand a much better and fairer chance in terms of coping up with what is happening around the globe. Please understand, we are sitting on a foreign exchange reserves of about $434 billion, which has increased in the last 5-6 months. We have had a foreign direct investment flow, despite the fact that there are falls which are taking place, exports are going down. The Reserve Bank of India report, which came out the other day, clearly outlined that about $17 billion have come in the last 3 to 4 months. Now, these are some factors. The M3 is fairly under control. The inflation is under control. These are macroeconomic factors, data which are there. And with the CMI data coming out, you see 6 million jobs cannot be created by just shift because of a crop to be sown and so on and so forth. There is a shift which is taking place from across the country because of the unemployment figures which you have been talking about. So there is a reallocation from which we say from rural India to urban, from urban to rural again, for different kind of activities. And the fact that digital framework of businesses is growing, so there are those shifts which we are observing today. So in my opinion, we are still growing at 6%. Let's not start counting down our government, our people in this country, that there is too much of negativity around. If you really look at the bigger picture, the world is a much bad position, as the MD of IMF said, as against what we are witnessing in India. We're still witnessing 6% growth. We're still seeing livelihoods
we don't have to be at the
so
kind of,
let's start
yes, no, but let's also put it in perspective, Mr. Aman Agarwal. Yeah, we have to be growing at a much faster pace than many of the other countries in the world. Otherwise, the impact on us for that slowdown is going to be much, much worse. That's the point with the kind of speed that we were growing at, that if this starts slowing down, the pain is a lot more. Now, but the point that you raised, let me take that point across. And back to Professor Mehrotra. Professor Mehrotra.
Tanvi, just one point.
Yes.
Tanvi, just 1 second. You see, Brinda also pointed out we are not totally dependent on the global economy.
Correct.
For the fact that we are still a part of the global economy. So certain heats will be borne by us. So we are already bearing those heats in terms of trade and the facts which are happening. But the whole growth within the country comes from within and not from outside. After 1919 debacles and sanctions put on us in 1990s, and that's what's created this global Indian economy to be more dependent on itself. So that way, that's why we are more still safer,
like she said, like our panelists have said,
much better than what we could be running today.
The fact that we are also a consumer economy, the consumer confidence is down and out. And I don't think when I say that it's an exaggeration. It's exactly what the RBI Consumer Confidence Survey just reflected 2 days ago. But Professor Mehrotra, let's come back to the fact of 6 million, jobs being added in rural India. Is that a number that Mahesh says looks noisy, but what explains it?
Mahesh explained it. I'm just only going to repeat what Mahesh said.
Yeah.
You see, rains came later this year. Because rains came later, this bump in rural employment, which would earlier have taken place in June, July, has taken place in August, September. It's very simple. That's what has happened.
So this goes away.
I don't think there's,
No,
there
but
is,
Aman Agarwal is saying there is a lot more to it and we shouldn't dismiss this employment figure.
I don't think there's an issue here. No, what is this all? What is this lot more? What is this lot more?
Okay, Professor Agarwal, please.
I think
yes,
it's
Professor
the rains
Agarwal,
coming
you
late,
talk about a
that's
shift that's happened.
Very simple.
What is it?
Yes. Correct. You see, Mr. Malhotra seems to be missing
What
that we
shift?
had rainfalls late even last year.
What shift?
So
I don't know what shift.
Did we see that kind of a bump last year as well? Mr. Malhotra, I'm not shouting. Can I speak if you don't mind? You see, please let us understand we have had shifts of rain even last year and even previous to that year also. So it's not that the shifts of rain have not been there. So much of labor mobility does not take place just to villages just for sowing or cutting crops. Please understand that. If the data, CMIE data is saying so, and if I believe what is being said here is about 6 billion jobs moving there, then there is more than what is there, which is happening than just moving for agriculture production. So this needs to be accepted, and this is clearly evident if the fact that what will happen to those people who are leaving, as you said, auto jobs,
are
they're leaving
back.
out of factories.
In other words, people who are
where will they go? Mr. Malhotra, can I speak? Mr. Malhotra, can I speak for a minute?
So precisely.
Thank you.
So precisely.
Yeah,
no, look, you've already had a chance. She was asking me. You came back at me. Can I come back now?
Okay, Aman Agarwal, let Aman Agarwal finish your point and then Santosh Malhotra can respond. So you are saying that there is a shift and
Yes,
people are going back
only.
from the cities to the villages, to the rural sector for employment.
Yes, because of as you've already pointed out, there have been jobs cut down in automobile sector and various others.
Correct.
Those people who work in these factories come from rural India.
But what jobs are they getting in rural India apart from sowing during Kharif season?
No. No. Let's come back again. You are thinking that maybe there are some of them who are more skilled, maybe going back to start up certain businesses as well.
Okay.
We will come to know that in another month or so. Mr. Malhotra is more advanced in knowing about it. It seems let him speak more about it. It seems he can explain the 6 billion shift now.
Okay,
and why
Professor
not depend
Malhotra,
on CMIE
yes.
instead of
and then I will go to our other two panelists also. But yes, Mr. Malhotra.
I'm going to only quote Mr. Agarwal. Mr. Agarwal is telling us that people have lost jobs in the urban areas and they have moved to rural areas. So jobs have moved from urban to rural areas. Does this mean an increase in jobs overall in the economy? Does this mean an increase in wage rates overall in the economy? The wage rates in rural areas are actually lower than they are in urban areas. So clearly, demand is going to be suppressed, which is exactly what the macro data is showing. That the consumption expenditure to GDP has systematically fallen over the last 2 years, and this is further demonstrated by the following fact, that because jobs are not growing overall, especially non-agricultural jobs are not growing. If anything, Mr. Agarwal has himself just admitted that non-agri jobs, which are better paying, are actually falling in number. That means more people are in agriculture. That means real wages in agriculture have fallen. That's exactly what the data is telling us. And if wages are falling and if jobs generally are falling, then demand is going to fall. And this is showing up in what? Another set of macro data. What is being shown up is that if people are maintaining consumption, they are doing it only on the basis of dis-saving. In other words, household savings have been falling. Household savings as a proportion of GDP, which were 24% in the year 2012, have fallen systematically over the last 6 years to 17%, a good 7 percentage point decline in household savings. In other words, if household savings have continued to decline, we shouldn't be too surprised that the investment to GDP has also been falling. It's quite another matter that the government might be pumping in, doing all the right things, the government might be pumping in money into the banks, but the consumer confidence is not there. Investors don't want to invest. They don't want to borrow. That's why the investment rate is not going to rise.
Okay. Brinda Jakadar, would you like to
And
come
exports, let me just say a few words about exports.
Okay.
Our
Yes.
export to GDP ratio, has systematically fallen from about 25% of GDP to about 17% of GDP. So, we can continue to pat ourselves on the back. The government is indeed trying its best, but the economy has continued to slow down. I'm sorry, what is one to say? It's government data. I'm only repeating to you what government data is telling us.
Yes, I take your point there, Brinda Jakadar, but would you want to also weigh in on this aspect of if there are these 6 million additional jobs, is there more to it than a Kharif sowing season? Is it a genuine shift of all the people who've lost their jobs in small businesses, in auto production facilities who've gone back to rural areas?
I would believe that there is a genuine shift, but we need some more study and examination into this. For example, anecdotal evidence tells you that, and from people I've been talking to, I gather that the living conditions and the opportunities in rural areas have improved dramatically, whether it's healthcare, whether it's electricity, whether it's living conditions, houses. So people are much more comfortable going back, maybe if they have to. But like I said, there are opportunities. Somebody who's driving a cab in Bombay says, I don't want to live here in these conditions. I'd rather go home. And I'll buy a taxi and I start a taxi service in my area. Now, this is what some people have told me. So I'm just quoting that anecdotal evidence. But we need a little more deeper study into what exactly is happening. But clearly something is happening, and it's maybe it's agriculture this time, but food processing, rural industries. There's a lot of focus on improving all this, and with the better roads, they don't need to come into urban areas to live. They can work from where they are in smaller areas also, in the tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 cities, etc. So I think we need a little more study. I haven't done the study, so I'm not able to quote any numbers on this, but I think we need somebody to look into it a little more closely and see what is happening. But clearly, definitely something is happening, and a shift is also happening. Now, having said this, let me say that we also need to be cautious, because our reserves to GDP, our reserves to debt, for example, earlier debt could cover about 80%, our reserves could cover about 80% of the debt, and this is now about 76% now, 2019 data put out by RBI. Similarly, reserves, how much of import cover do we have? So we had something like close to 11 months import cover last year, but our reserves can cover only about 9 odd months imports now. So it's something we need to watch out, something we need to really be cautious about, but it's not as if it's all gloom and doom. Given the front ending of infrastructure spending by the government spending in general,
but where is the government
spending?
Rates
And the policies that have
all
been
on paper. So, firstly, we don't even know the spending. If those figures add up, the government is getting zero revenue, not zero, but barely any revenue. They're further giving corporate tax cuts, which essentially means they're going to be cutting their spending even more. Where is the expenditure coming from?
No, I don't believe the government is going to cut its spending, because this spending is actually spurring growth. What they will do now, let's not forget that we are going to get in more money from disinvestment, for example, and they are looking to divest even profitable companies. So not just offloading something that doesn't work, but even companies where the market would be interested and would pay a good price for it. So there are other areas, the non-tax areas are where money will come in, and the government is definitely not on a back foot now. It wants to spur growth in the economy, give a fillip to investment. It will have to take the lead for investment, so that private capex can also get follow. Now, there was one one news item which said that even Lockheed is going to come and manufacture wings for F-16 planes in India. So, these are anecdotal. So let's just be, and I said, we are not going to see the impact now, definitely not in this calendar year.
Correct.
Maybe
So this
in the next year, the next last
let's
quarter
brace
of the
ourselves
next
this
year,
year.
this fiscal. And this
Yes.
year, I don't see.
Correct.
Yes.
Okay. I get your point. I get what you're saying. Let's quickly bring in a few voices from our viewers as well. Anil Kumar on the phone line from Chennai. Good evening, Anil. Go ahead, please.
Hi, Tanvi. How are you?
I'm good. Go ahead, please. What would you like to say?
Yeah, I want to point out about this slowdown in India and the world. But I want to say that we can't compare world slowdown to India because India is in front of world. It is not even born. See, in the world, forward nations and all, they've achieved so much. Now they've only groomed either to upgrade or just to build a new city. They trash the whole city and bring build a new city. But in compared to that, India is not even born. And moreover, I want to point out that once the Honorable Prime Minister, about 5 years before he has announced was Make in India, French ex-president has said, we have to say make with the world has to say make with India.
Right.
Because India has so much of a capacity. So much of a capacity it can put world economy, it can lift the world economy. So it is just, we have to see we can't say that world is at a slowdown. India is also suffering from the slowdown. And moreover, the government is not releasing the funds, whatever the electricity board or whatever.
Correct. The government keeps telling us that they're going to ensure that all pending funds and bills are actually paid. But I take your point, which is what some of our panelists were also saying. There's one other aspect that I want to touch upon. But before we go across to go back to consumer sentiment and consumer buying, Mr. Siraj Hassan, do you agree with largely what is being said about shift in employment because there are not too many urban opportunities, that these people are moving back to rural and that there is some opportunity beyond kharif sowing which is there?
No, I do not agree. In fact, I feel a little disappointed that even professionals take the political line. It is the job of the professionals to show the mirror to the government and to communicate what is actually happening on the ground. I have followed food processing sector for some time. The wages in the food processing sector, in fact, are lower than the agricultural wages. So even if a little bit of labor has moved from urban areas to food processing, first of all, I doubt it very much. They would earn very low wages, and that would be reflecting in the decline in rural wages. So I do not think that this shift will have any long-term implication. First of all, I would like to see the state-wise data, whether the higher level of employment is in states where the sowing has actually improved. See, rural labor got employed in construction sector between 2008 and 2014. Now we have seen today itself reports have come that in NCR, Mumbai and all other regions the construction sector is still in decline. It is not showing any signs of revival. So obviously, where will people find employment? So if people have lost jobs in urban areas, in small scale industries, even in big industries, they will move back to rural areas. Now that may be showing in the CMIE data, but I think that data needs more analysis.
Yes, so this is for everybody who was jumping at this data earlier today to say let's analyze it with caution. It doesn't necessarily mean that things have begun to turn around. Now, one other indicator that everybody is very closely watching is the consumption this festival season. Santosh Mehrotra, we don't have any official hardcore data available because the season is still on. We have some quotes to go by. And, the Flipkart CEO says we've doubled our transactions in tier 3 cities. Fashion, general merchandise and beauty categories are doing well with first-time shoppers. So they're obviously sounding extremely bullish on the kind of sales they're witnessing. Amazon India head says, we received orders from 99% of India's PIN codes, of which 88% customers were from smaller towns. Do you believe that these online sales which are going on, where a lot has been spoken about, a huge jump in the banking transactions, that's any kind of indicator of a revival?
It's good news that there is some sort of revival that these online transactions are seeing. But do we know that these online transactions are in addition to what was happening till last year offline? Do we know that? I don't think we know that. And what we do know is that overall consumption to GDP is declining. So I don't know how much, of course, Amazon should get very excited, Flipkart should get very excited. And I don't grudge them one bit. But is this a shift of demand from the offline sector to the online sector, which is certainly what's happening to a significant extent, but does this amount to offline plus online actually overall increasing? Probably not.
Okay, fair enough point. Aman Agarwal, would you like to weigh in? At least people are buying. Can we say that? They have begun to show more interest in spending some money?
I think the information is too micro to actually go about making those kind of inferences. However, one thing which I would like to bring forth here is that the pockets of the rural India are much more deeper than the pockets of people living in the urban zones, which typically depend on bank financing and banks for large part of their activities, including credit cards and others. So from that perspective, even if they have more people living in the rural areas, they are actually cash-rich people, and that's where you will see more boost come up. So in my opinion, whatever, irrespective of what CMI data says, irrespective of what the wages, I think that is very clearly identified by even MD of the IMF, and even the Fed, Powell said the 2 days back about the way central banks are reducing, the way wages are going down across the globe. So it is not a question of what are we earning, what are we able to save and put it on consumption or for use for great. I think that's more important. And as even the MD and I have been speaking about, it's the real growth which is felt by people at large parts of the country, instead of just the factor of growth of 8% or 9% or 10% or my earning. And that's what we saw in Japanese model as well. People started earning in Japan huge amounts, but their consumer real income, which was remaining at the end, or the amount they had at the end of the day, was very little. So it's important that what we have and what we do. So this is an indication, yes, from one perspective. But the more indicative part which you spoke of was that these people have said that the sales which have come is from rural part of India and not from the urban part of India. That is again in consensus with the CMI data, which clearly means that people who have got used to these new technology based structures are actually shifting on, and they are basically maybe consuming. That's only a hunch.
So
I cannot really
this is the beginning. Let's see
because I don't have that data with me.
If in a further few months data continues to show us the same trend. It can't be on the basis of one data point. It definitely cannot be on the basis of just 1 month of information. If we are talking about the larger economy, if we're talking about a turnaround in this economy, we will have to wait and see what happens in the coming few months. But largely, all of our experts are in agreement that at least this year and maybe few more months, the pain is not going away. Yes, the government has taken a few steps to largely boost the sentiment and maybe fix a few long-term issues, but is that going to be enough? And if the world economy starts going down, will that make our turnaround even longer? Will it mean that we will have to be in the state of slowdown, in the state of jobs crisis, in the state of lack of consumer confidence and a bleak future environment for a longer period of time? We've explained to you, the experts who put out the CMI data on unemployment have come to this show and told you that this could just be a blip. Don't take it too seriously. So let's wait and watch to see what comes next. Mirror Now will continue with its big focus on economy, because that is what impacts you on a daily basis. We've got some breaking news coming in. Well, the Muzaffarpur police has cancelled the FIR against the 49 personalities or celebrities, as many were saying, and has termed it as false. Now a case will be filed against the petitioner. Now this is a significant turnaround that's happened, especially because this was a court-ordered FIR. Shyam is on the phone line to help us understand what just happened. Shyam?
Well, the Muzaffarpur investigating officer in this case, after the FIR was registered, the IO has found the case to be maliciously false, and that is the reason why the case has been termed as false. And now, or rather, the Muzaffarpur court has filed a case against the petitioner Sudhir Oja in this case. As you all know, that the petition was filed in the court against all the 49 petitioners, which included celebrities like Aparna Sen, Anurag Basu, and others. And that was the reason why the CJM court had ordered local police station to register an FIR against all these 49 celebrities who had written a letter to the Prime Minister. So after the case was registered, the investigating officer was asked to look into the truth of the case, and after his investigation, he termed the case to be maliciously false, and that is the reason why he cancelled the FIR, and now rather an FIR has been registered against the petitioner Sudhir Oja, who is a local social activist and a lawyer in Muzaffarpur.
All right, so that's interesting. Obviously, an FIR was filed on the order of the court, investigation carried out, the case found to be false and malicious, and now that case has been dropped. Sedition case against these 49 celebrities who wrote a letter simply to the Prime Minister expressing their concern over lynchings has now been dropped. But the debate largely still continues over lynchings, and whether we should be even talking about it or not, and what that really does to the image of this country. Shyam, thanks so much for joining us. But this actually brings us to the next big conversation point. The number of lynchings in our country, and if they are of any concern, or if it's just a conspiracy that is being hatched to malign the government, to malign the image of our country by saying, oh, look at this, minorities and Dalits are being targeted in our country. Today, in fact, yesterday, the RSS chief, Mohan Bhagwat, waded into this controversy with his remarks. He said that lynching is a Western construct and shouldn't be used in the Indian context to defame the country. The RSS chief was speaking at a Dasera event in Nagpur in Maharashtra. I have two panelists who will join us on this big conversation, but before we go across to them, let's listen in to Mohan Bhagwat.
उदारता की हमारी परंपरा है, सबके स्वीकार की हमारी परंपरा है। यहाँ ऐसी बातें कभी हुई नहीं, जिन देशों में हुई वहाँ उनके लिए शब्द है। जैसे एक शब्द चला पिछले साल, लिंचिंग, ये क्या हमारे यहाँ होता था कभी? हुआ है?
I must also say that Mohan Bhagwat did say that whatever the crime that's taking place in our country shouldn't happen. There is no justification for it. But it's interesting the way he says that lynching तो हमारे देश में कभी होता ही नहीं था. ये तो Western concept है. The big debate obviously is it problematic that lynchings are happening in our country, or is it problematic that we are talking about it? Because if you talk about it and if you write letters to Prime Minister, you may end up facing a sedition case against you. Let's say good evening to Rakesh Sinha, Member of Parliament of the Rajya Sabha, joining us this evening, and Pawan Verma, former Member of Parliament of Rajya Sabha. Good evening to both of you, gentlemen. Mr. Sinha, this debate that happens, do you agree that often we deviate from the actual topic of lynchings and start talking about, oh, why did you speak about one kind of lynching and not the other? And the fact that you're speaking up is only maligning the image of our country.
You know, there are two dimensions of Mohan Bhagwatji's speech. One is the empirical dimension, in which he outrightly, unequivocally condemned all kinds of violence-based action of any individual, whosoever may be. He has not named any community, has not named any ideology, left, right, center, Hindu, Muslim, Christian or Jews. He categorically said that anyone who perpetuates violence should be punished. He also suggested Swayamsevaks in the government to enforce the law strictly against them, and if these laws are not sufficient, kindly make a new law. This is one dimension, and that I think in democracy, if something good is coming, we must engage in debate in constructive way rather than deconstructing it for no result. Correct. Second important dimension, more important dimension, is the normative dimension. That normative dimension is that he has initiated debate. Every society, every civilization passes through some kind of conflict. No society is free from conflicts. But the nature of social conflict and nature of resolution, that is the mainstream nature of resolution, because all types of conflicts take place in all the places. But the major resolution and major problems, he talked about that. Just I'm just mentioning, which I wouldn't like to mention, but this is a pertinent here debate without hurting any community.
In Islamic society, there is a punishment for rape, there is a punishment for theft. But in our society, these are not legitimized by religion, not legitimized by other things. There is a caste discrimination. Dalits have been many times Dalits have been killed and Dalits have been tortured. But there are resolution their time. Gandhi's Harjan Yatra, JP came, even the JDU party, Pawan Verma belongs to Janata Dal U, and his party has resolved the issues in Bihar in such a constructive manner. Therefore, Mohan Bhagwat, this normative dimension is more important. In medieval society, Christian society, there has been lynching.
So, Mr. Sinha, let me ask you this question.
Bloody Mary, we all know in England, 300 priests were burnt.
Mr. Sinha, let me ask you this question. So,
yes.
what is Mr. Mohan Bhagwat saying? We shouldn't call it lynchings? What do we call these crimes where an angry mob or a group of people get together and beat somebody up so badly that they die right there? And in some cases, while there are cases where it's because of suspicion of theft, there are cases where it's suspicion of kidnapping, and then there are cases where bigotry comes to the fore. What should we call these crimes?
No, I'm answering. You know, when the lynching word and the lynching, the kind of criminal activity began in the medieval world, and that sometimes perpetuates. When the Senator of America and some representatives of the people on Facebook write for lynching and support the lynching, that is not the case of India. When you say India is a lynchistan and lynching takes place, the outside India, the image of India is compared with the medieval tradition of lynching in the Christian world and medieval tradition which exists in some Islamic world. Therefore, there are mob violence, no doubt. Dozens of witches were killed in Jharkhand in 2013 and 14-15. Because they were considered that they are enemy of the common people. Some people are killed on the basis of rumor. But our society has a resolution mechanism, and I think whatever happened, nobody is justifying, nobody is legitimizing, nobody is giving dignity. Dignity is given by those who connect it with ideology, with community, with a ruling organization. If you suppose I commit a crime, and you connect me with a Janata Dal U, you connect me with a Communist Party, or you connect me with the RSS, then a fringe element, suppose I am a fringe element, then I get a dignity. I get a cover of the ideology and the party. Then the fringe elements of that ideology and organization come for my rescue.
Fair enough. Now, I have a response to that, but I am not going to get into this debate. This is you versus, and I have Mr. Pawan Verma on the other side. Mr. Pawan Verma, does it seem that the debate invariably becomes about why are you talking about lynchings rather than being concerned about the fact that there are lynchings happening in our country?
You know, Tanvi, I'm a proud Hindu. And it pains me that when someone like Mohan Bhagwat ji, who also professes and is a defender of the grandeur of Hinduism, finds means to obfuscate the taint on our society by the fact that a group of people take the law into their own hands in the cause of protecting Hinduism and devalue me as a citizen and demean me as a Hindu. To talk about lynchings in a democracy and the taint they put on our society is a tribute to the vibrancy of our democracy. It is not an attempt to defame us in any way. I do not believe that Indians or Hindus are lynchers, but I believe that there are elements within Hindu society and within society as a whole who tend to take the law into their own hands. They are illiterate bigots who believe that they have, in some manner, the powers that be on their side. And there have been countless incidents in which this has been shown. And I want to ask that how can you beat a man to death by asking him to recite Jai Shri Ram, the great Maryada Purushottam Ram, who says to Bharat in Tulsidas's Ramcharit Manas, पर हित सरस धर्म नहीं भाई, पर पीड़ा सम नहीं अधमाई. there is no greater sin than injury to others than violence of this kind. He says this. He says this to Bharat himself.
Yes.
He's Maryada Purushottam Ram.
Yes.
And there are people who are making an unarmed, innocent person recite Jai Shri Ram and beating him to death. And what does the police do? The police says that when this 24-year-old dies a few days later,
He
they
died
say
of a heart
he
attack.
died of cardiac arrest
Correct.
and not the merciless beating by 13 people. And they downplay the crime to culpable homicide.
Okay, so let me take
What
that point,
happens
Mr.
when
Verma,
victims,
and take it back to Rakesh
FIRs
Sinha.
are filed against victims?
Rakesh
And
Sinha,
they-
when you
for
say
cruelty
don't
to
link it to an
animals,
ideology,
rather than against
don't
those
link
who
it to a
perpetrated
specific
the crime.
community, correct?
And it is recorded on video.
Yes. So Rakesh Sinha, when you say don't link it to an ideology, don't link it to a specific community, then how do we explain the fact that in most of these cases, especially the ones that made it to the national headlines, every attempt was made to dilute the case to protect the accused?
No, I have a question to Mr. Pawan Verma. In how many cases in Bihar there are some mob violences? He stood and he said that these are the RSS men who committed the crime. There are mob violence in Bihar too. He is a part of the ruling coalition. And I have a question. Before 2014, the mob violence was a secular violence. After 2014, all mob violence belongs to Hindutva. Suppose I give a slogan, JDU Jindabad, and I commit crime. This means entire JDU, and because I have given the slogan
But
of JDU,
if you get
so
off the
Janata
hook-
Dal, you is a part of that
But
crime.
Mr. Sinha, will you
not
not
at all.
answer my question? But if you get off the hook by saying chanting JDU slogans,
Yes, I'm
and then
I'm
don't
coming
get get sent to jail, then won't we ask the question that is JDU protecting you?
I'm answering. I'm coming to that. I'm coming to that. You know, Mohan Bhagwat's message is very strong, very clear, very loud. He had also given message to the police, civil society, and the administration. If you are confused that these elements and third-rate elements, whether killer of the Pahlu Khan or the Prasant Pujari, I don't discriminate. And unlike Pawan Verma, I don't connect anyone with a particular community.
Okay.
He mentioned 3 times about the Hindu community fringe elements. There are fringe elements in all society and all region, Mr. Verma.
Okay,
Not only
I'm sorry, I
Just
have to
claiming
interrupt
that you are
here.
a great-
I'm completely out of time. Thank you so much to both of our panelists for joining. It was interesting to hear both sides of this story. I have a very limited point of view here. The concern in our country needs to be the lynchings. It doesn't matter if the lynchings are for child kidnapping or for theft or over hatred, caste discrimination or religion. The fact of the matter is that it's happening. And rather than addressing this problem, we are getting embroiled in a debate about why we are talking about it and why we didn't talk yesterday or why we didn't talk 10 years ago. We are completely diluting the debate by not focusing on the core issue, which is this hate crime. Thank you so much for joining us on this debate.